Hey everybody, it's Paul Yeager. This is the MTOM Show podcast, a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV program. Take a look at those lines right there. Those have freshly been mowed. If this was some cities in, say, Wisconsin or Minnesota, this might be in a program called Mow May. It's a chance to help pollinators in the spring, whether they be the dandelion, which I think we all know has its own life, or is it a pretty flower like that we know is truly fake? But it is something that we are going to talk about today with Elaine Evans from the University of Minnesota and Extension. We have this conversation about pollinators, and we're going to move into some bug things, talk a little bit about changes in weather, say a late spring, rain, snow, floods, what that's doing to help the environment. That's the discussion today in this episode of the MTOM Show podcast, which comes out each Tuesday. We thank each and every one of you who have been a subscriber. Then you know when we have a new episode. Now, let's get to our chat. All right, Elaine, when spring is so late, do you get stir crazy of waiting to see all of the fun things that you know that are out there are going to come back soon? Does a delayed winter just drive you crazy?
It's kind of a mixed bag because for my personal self, I get really anxious to get out there. For my work self, I usually have field work that I need to prepare for, and I'm usually not ready yet. So I usually don't mind at all when we have such a late spring because it gives me extra time to get ready for when the bees do come out.
I made a trip a couple hours south of Des Moines yesterday, and I spent the whole day looking out the window at the trees going, there was nothing. Everything looked the same into Missouri and into Kansas City. I'm guessing the leaves aren't really in your area either.
Right. There's pussy willows are out and making pollen, and there's a lot of trees that are budding and leaves starting to come out. But definitely, I have the feeling just a couple more warm days and everything's going to go crazy.
Well, that's okay, I guess. We go from 0 to 60 in half a second. That's kind of the way these weather experiences have been. The day job for you is it's split. Tell me what it is.
Right. So I am an extension educator here at the University of Minnesota, and I specialize in pollinators. So I do extension work. I do a lot of public involvement with monitoring pollinators and work on talking about pollinator habitat, how to encourage pollinator habitat and educate and prepare people to be pollinator educators. And then I also do research. So half of my position is just focused on research, which is also focused on bees. So the main overarching theme that I have is pollinator conservation.
Where are we at in how that's changed in your career? Has it changed dramatically?
Definitely. So I've been doing this for a while. So I started 25 years ago working on bees. And when I was first working on bees, people really didn't get it. There wasn't very much interest in pollinators, even at that time we knew how important they were for our food and for our environment. And it really took problems with honeybee colonies when colony collapse disorder happened, started, reaching the public mind where there were these big honeybee health problems. People realized we need to pay attention to these other pollinators too, because they're important. And so it's really over the last, 15 years that people have, there's been a huge increase in public awareness and public actions to help pollinators.
I always think pollinators as bees. So what are the other pollinators?
Pollinators it's an interesting category because it's really about a function. It's about moving pollen between plants. And so in terms of animals that do that, all kinds of different things that are visiting flowers can move pollen. So bees are the big one because they actually gather pollen to feed their young. So they're really getting in there, getting a lot of pollen on them and moving a lot of pollen around. There's a lot of other animals that visit plants mostly for nectar. And they kind of pick up some pollen and move it around a little bit as they're doing that. So butterflies and moths. flies, wasps. There are some birds in here in the upper Midwest. It's mostly we have one species of hummingbird, but in some tropical systems and in deserts, there's a lot more birds and also bats that will visit flowers and move pollen around.
The bats, they can do that at night. They don't know, they can see what they're doing, I guess, those great eyes they have.
Yeah, yeah. And there are some flowers that just bloom at night and are really, aiming to get those moths and, night flying moths and bats are their only pollinators.
How'd you get involved in this?
I started out just being interested in insects in general. So I was interested in conservation. I was interested in, learning about nature. And as soon as I started doing that, kind of, peeling back the skin there, seeing that how important insects were and how little attention we were paying to insects, especially in terms of conservation. So even still, so pollinators now have gotten awareness, but there's all these other things that insects do that are really important, soil decomposition and, basic ecological functions where insects are really important for nutrient cycling, all that kind of stuff, where I think we're still not paying enough attention. So pollinators ended up being a nice way for me to be able to focus on insects and conservation, and also have something where it was easier to explain to people and get people to care, because it does affect the food on our plates. That's maybe easier to hook people into than talking about these things, all these insects that are eating rotting stuff out there in the environment. They're really important, but it's probably going to be harder to get people to immediately care about them than pollinators. And plus, pollinators have this intrinsic appeal, just being out with the flowers. Actually, for myself, as soon as I was volunteered for a project where I was looking on insect pollinators in prairies, and just getting out there with the prairie flowers, seeing these interactions, having an understanding of how important it is, to move pollen around, getting a chance to get to know flowering plants too, which are beautiful and diverse. So that really hooked me in.
I always think of Minnesota, which is your home state, of being a strong, environmentally aware state. When you're the land of 10,000 lakes, everybody always thinks about, well, you have to keep the lake health well, because if we don't have fishing, we don't have recreation, we don't have Iowans, South Dakotans, Nebraskans, whoever coming to your state to fish on opening weekend or whatever it is going to be. So there's always that, to me, built into the DNA of the Minnesotan. Do you find that helps you find audiences for what it is you're trying to talk about?
Yes, absolutely. Minnesota has definitely been really really open and engaged in pollinator work. We have a research project in the Bee Lab called Minnesota Agriculture for Pollinators. And part of that project, it's in Southwest Minnesota, so in a heavier ag area. And we were interested in looking at the impact of planting for pollinators in agricultural areas. And we needed to connect with growers that were willing to convert soy into pollinator plantings. And we had an incredible response where we had, about twice as many people who were interested as we could engage in the project. So across the board. So not just, not just kind of your typical, what you might picture as an environmentalist being interested in pollinators, but since pollinators impact everything, it's really, really across the board in all areas of the state, all kinds of different different things that people are doing for their livelihoods.
Yeah.
And politically, there's been a lot of really pollinator forward legislation that's been able to pass through to really kind of codify, to solidify our pollinator forward stance.
We truly believe, therefore we pass a law or an ordinance. And that's kind of how I connected to you. There's an ordinance, and I saw this story out of Wisconsin first. I think it was maybe La Crosse was going to do, and I'd never heard of this. No, Mow, May. How'd that come about?
I believe that it started in the UK, and there's a lot of pollinator forward stuff happening there as well. And it started as just a way to focus on what's happening in May, in early spring, to provide flowers for pollinators and other wildlife as things are coming out of hibernation and needing to access resources. There are things that are growing in lawns that are flowering in lawns, and if we don't mow them down right away, we can let those resources be there to support those creatures.
Be there. I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so the concept is in April, May, you don't cut the lawn. You let the lawn go. The standard lawn, what does it provide that allows for an environment to work for all these pollinators? You mentioned a couple of flowers, and I think of dandelions. I mean, is that something that where we can start?
So I really view no mow May. It's this catchy phrase, and people also like the idea of doing nothing and having it have a positive impact. The main idea is having flowers, being able to provide more flowers in the landscape. So, if you just literally are looking at no mow May, the impact is going to be really variable depending on what is in those lawns. I think the main thing that I like about No Mow May is just getting people to look at their lawns differently, to realize, for a lot of people, most of the land that we're managing is just in our yards, and it's going to be, for a lot of people, a lot of that is going to be in lawn. And looking at that and thinking, well, what's really happening there? We're used to this perfectly manicured, turf grass, but that's really not providing much for much of anyone. So being able to look at that and think, well, what could be there? And for some people, this kind of first baby step might be that they have some dandelions, they have some creeping Charlie, they have some white clover. And if you give that stuff a chance to flower before you're mowing it down, there are resources that pollinators can get from those things. It is important to still manage your lawn. So in terms of no mow May, it really depends on the season. Like you said, it might be April. If one thing I'm afraid of is people, there being, backlash if there's all these dandelions that go to seed and other people are then just spraying more herbicides on their lawns, as a result of that. So it is mostly just, kind of keeping an eye on things. You can let that first bloom happen, but before stuff goes to seed, getting in there and mowing, even if it's in the middle of May, that's happening. I'm hoping also people will look beyond just those things that are there just by chance, the kind of stuff that just pops up, and think about what can they put into their lawn. So there are a whole host of native plants that we can let grow in our lawns. You can, some of them will show up naturally as well. Some of them you may need to take that extra effort. So beyond that baby step, you may be able to look at, what can I plant into my lawn. So things like violets and pussy toes is a wonderful native plant that blooms really early. I have tons of Virginia waterleaf in my lawn. Most of my lawn in my St. Paul yard is Virginia waterleaf because I've let it spread. It's a native plant that blooms in May and is great for pollinators.
I, okay, I'm pretty convinced that dandelions have this ability. When they hear the lawnmower start up in the garage, that head will drop down into the ground and not let it cut. And then as soon as you pass, it comes right back up. So I mean, do we really need to help the dandelion? I mean, come on, those grow so well between weeks. And so I've had this discussion before. Weeds can adapt. And I call it a weed. I know it has a place, but some of these plants do adapt no matter what the chemical, no matter what the treatment is for that. So in a way, science has won again because those plants have survived to allow them to be there to help pollinate. Am I close?
Yeah, I do think management is difficult for for those weeds, and they do rebloom. So dandelion kind of famously keeps going. I mean, if it's as long, I don't even know what the minimum temperature is, but I've seen dandelions blooming in Minnesota in November.
Oh,
They'll just they'll keep going, and I mean they are really adapted to keep going and to spread themselves. And I'm not super excited about both dandelion and creeping Charlie as sources for pollinators. So it is better than nothing, I
yeah.
do believe. But for example, dandelions, they are a great source of nectar, but their pollen, there's been some research showing that the pollen that they produce is not very nutritious. When there was an experiment that had dandelion pollen and was feeding it to bumblebees, and the bumblebees, they had so little nutrition from the dandelion pollen that they ate their own eggs.
Oh.
So it's really not giving them enough protein and those other nutrients that they need. It is a great nectar source. The hope is that, that nectar is really important too. There'll be other, sources that are out there, but just again, kind of looking at getting a diversity of plants out there to be able to support pollinators.
Okay. When you mentioned November and weather, it made me think of something of we've had in Iowa. We always discuss it around here. I know that you're usually a little colder where you're at, and the ground will freeze longer. Is that good in helping pollinators when it is either warmer longer in cold regions or colder longer in cold regions? I mean, which one helps and which one is needed to help any of these bugs or insects that we're discussing?
Yeah, that's a good question, and something that we don't have much research to help us figure that out. One thing we do know, some of the really cold snaps that we get are good at controlling some of those invasive insects that aren't necessarily fully adapted for Minnesota. They are, the upper Midwest, they show up here, but we can get some of those super cold winters and kind of, knock down some of those populations while our native insects are able to survive. There is concern for bees and I'm sure other insects that are overwintering, that if it's not cold enough, if there's not enough snow cover, so a lot of these insects are hibernating underground, and the snow is this great insulator. So when there's not as much snow cover, there's concern that they wouldn't be cold enough. A lot of the insects that are overwintering, so I know for bumblebees and a lot of other bees, they're overwintering as adults, and they have this fat body that they're using, and so that's how they're getting their calories to survive. Their metabolism is lower, but they still do need to have some metabolism going, and they're relying on that fat body. So when it tends to be when things are warmer, their metabolism is going more and they might use up that fat body that they have to survive. So this is a concern just based on theory, but we don't have, currently we haven't been able to have, experiments to really look and see what the impact is of those, changing temperatures.
Well, and that's, I'm sure, a topic that you have in your circles of when you're at trade meetings or something like that. Of, is anybody doing research? Should we do, you're trying to figure out, because what is the biggest threat to these pollinators right now?
Right. It is really, as far as we know, really a combination of a lot of different things. So that's one of the things that gets complicated is, we know that habitat is really important. So that's going to affect their nutrition. What we're one of the things Mow May is trying to deal with is getting more flowers out there. We know flowers are important, but they also need, for these native pollinators, they need places to live. So habitat isn't just flowers. It's also having kind of messy corners in your yard, leaving some stems. There's bees that nest in stems, having places where they can make their homes as well. We are concerned. You were just asking about temperature, fluctuations. Climate change is a big concern where, there's extreme weather events that are affecting everything. So, if there's a wildfire that comes through and burns everything up, that's not going to be good. Flooding, there's been some studies that have looked at the impact of, exceptional flooding happening in areas, impacting pollinators that are living there. Pesticides are a big concern. So, exposure to both insecticides and fungicides. Fungicides, insecticides make sense because, we're talking about insect pollinators, but fungicides will actually impact their ability to digest and get nutrition. So even though we talk about bees eating pollen, a lot of what they end up eating are microbes that grow in pollen, and so fungicides can get rid of those microbes and really have a negative impact on bee health. The other things that we think about are pesticides, sorry, pathogens. So diseases that can and pests. So there are parasites that affect pollinators as well as diseases. Some of these are novel diseases that can be spread. So one of the concerns for bumblebees. So we have the rusty patch bumblebee is an endangered species that's protected federally. And one of the main things that we think caused their decline is disease. And it could be diseases that spread from managed bumblebees. So we have bumblebees that are raised commercially and used for pollination. And the idea is that there could have been a different strain of a disease that escaped from these, commercial colonies. Likewise, there's concern with managed honeybees, which we know they have a lot of problems with diseases, that they might be spreading diseases to other pollinators as well. So these are things that we're still figuring out as a research community, but it's definitely a concern.
I would say I see some of the same places that I see have bees every year. I'll see the boxes. They have them every year, and I hear people who say, "Oh, I'm going to bring in some bees here from there," and they're. I mean, is that type of movement and placement important too, to help diversify flocks? That kind of what you're referring to a little bit there.
Right. So managed honeybees are really this unique thing where it's this animal that's going out and pollinating, but yet we can look inside of those hives. We can treat them. So in terms of populations of pollinators, we know that honeybees have health problems, but we also know that beekeepers know how to manage them, know how to care for them. And they're, so we're not concerned about honeybees going extinct. We are concerned about their health problems. So the main thing there is making sure that they're being managed carefully and mindfully. And, commercial beekeepers, they are as part of just what they do, they have to move colonies around. They're moving huge numbers of colonies to where, crops are blooming with the way agriculture is now. If there's these, huge areas where there's not enough habitat there to support the native pollinators, they need to bring in honeybees. So some of that is about how we do agriculture. So, there are places where there are smaller crops that are surrounded by more natural landscape, and we're able to rely more on those native pollinators. But the really important thing with honeybees is there's some people that hear that bees are in trouble and they think, oh, I'll help them by getting honeybees. And I mean, it's a great hobby. It's this really unique experience that can really change people's lives. But you're not really going to be helping bees. The main thing you need to do is get habitat out there.
That's what I was just going to say. So you're telling me I'm not going to bring in 100 bees. I'm going to bring in habitat. That's going to be the best way, and some type of different flowering product you're giving me the us and down. I must stop talking, Paul. But that would be the best help, right?
Yeah, and if you are really passionate about honeybees and you want to keep honeybees, just making sure that you're aware they're flying out a mile or two away from where you put those hives to gather food. So looking at that landscape that's around you, you might be able to, where you have those bees in your property that you have, you may be able to add a lot of habitat there, but you have to look out beyond that. So it's really important to look at that, to make sure that those honeybees that you're bringing in aren't taking resources, really limited resources away from other pollinators that are relying on them. And also that you're being careful to take the steps you need to keep your honeybees healthy. So there's a lot of management that you need to do going in the colonies, checking on them, seeing what they have, and treating them when they need to be treated.
And I'm guessing things change by region. So I could easily say, give me the Minnesota website that I should go to. But if I'm in Minnesota, it's different from Iowa to Missouri to Oklahoma. So what's my best place to check for information that I can be of assistance for what you're talking about?
In terms of beekeeping or pollinators
in general, to find out what's going to be my best habitat that I create that help the pollinators that are in my area.
Yeah. So there are, fortunately, a lot of people working on this in different areas. So a lot of states, their Department of Natural Resources, a lot of them have pollinators as a priority. A lot of states do have pollinator plans. So checking in with state agencies where there's, departments of natural resources, or here in Minnesota, our Board of Water and Soil Health they've put together amazing resources that do apply regionally. So I would think even our in Iowa it would be pretty similar, but when you do get further south, you need to check in the NRCS. So more of that's a national organization, but they do a lot of work with getting planting recommendations for people to support pollinators. So, and they will have local resources to help people connect with to find out what's best in your area.
I love it. Elaine Evans from the University of Minnesota and Extension as well. Thank you for splitting your time and helping us out as we covered a whole round of stuff, and I knew we would. And thank you for just talking about what you do. I just am always fascinated, and your passion is very obvious. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Looks like I'm going to have to go and do a little mowing here before it rains again. But that's the story from us here at the M2M Show podcast. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any feedback for us, Send it to our way at market2market at iowapbs.org. Thank you for watching, listening, or reading. We'll talk to you next time.